just settle down there on Mars is not going to find life. There's no life on Mars. We're all bummed out about that, but you have to have liquid water in continuous contact with soil and air to have that happen, and that doesn't happen on Mars. But that's another talk. If you want me to get together with another talk, that'd be kind of cool. But it certainly gives you a perspective on climate change to be a planetary geologist, because we're looking at planets, and it just happens to be the one we're on right now. But we've seen climate change in different planets all over the place. Mars is one of them. Venus, of course, is where we learned about global warming and greenhouse effect. So that is actually a good segue into this talk today. So mitigating climate change. Do we have a plan B? Because plan A is not going well, and not going to go well, unfortunately. And I'm going to kind of be blunt today, because the pandemic has really taught me that I don't really care about political correctness. Who cares? Life's too short. And, my hair's too long. By the way, I haven't cut my hair since the pandemic. And so it's kind of funny. I haven't had it this long since Carter administration. So anyway, so plan A. What's plan A? If we talk about plan B, then what's plan A? Plan A is we take all of this stuff and get rid of it. Can you see my cursor, by the way? Oh, good. So you take all of this stuff on the right side, get rid of it, and bring up all the stuff on the left side. So it's very easy, simple, not easy, sorry, simple. Get rid of this stuff, bring up this stuff. You can't be choosy. We need it all. And one of the problems is people are trying to be choosy. People either like wind, they don't like nuclear, they want to get rid of hydro. I mean, all this nonsense. It's like you need all of this. If you don't bring all of this up, you're not going to make a dent in this. This is huge. The amount of fossil fuel that we use in this country is 87% of our primary energy. 87%. Okay, so if you think you can knock out nuclear or knock out hydro or something and just do this with a couple, you're insane. And that's why we're failing. That's why we are failing. So, and the only thing I want to do about climate change here is that this is the prediction of IPCC, the International, God, what is PC? Anyway, on climate change. Panel on climate change. Sorry. Thanks, Gino. So they said, and this is reasonable. Our modeling has gotten quite good, that if you wanted to keep global warming to just 2 degrees Celsius, 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, then you need to start cutting global emissions, okay? CO2 equivalent. And you needed to actually come down, like beginning in 2011, come down to near zero by mid-century. I mean, you just have to do this. And you need to cut by 3 to 4% a year. Well, that's a huge amount. Well, we blew that one. So here comes 2015. We're now supposed to cut 5% a year and go to zero. Okay, there isn't any slop anymore. And we blew that one. So now 2020 is behind us. I have to fix this slide now. It's behind us. So we were supposed to be cutting at 9% a year and go to zero by 2040. And that's not happening, okay? In fact, if you want to shout out how much we are decreasing, what is our rate of reduction? Anyone want to comment? It's a trick question.
Aren't we still increasing?
Yes, it's a trick question because we are still increasing. In fact, every single reasonable prediction by every organization on Earth, except really fringe ones, is that our emissions will increase slightly until mid-century. They will not go down at all. And that's because we are still building fossil fuel plants almost as fast as we were building them 10 years ago. So yeah, sure, there's a lot of wind turbines going up. They don't mean anything because they're not very good anyway, but there's not enough of them. The volume is huge. The numbers are big and people don't get that. So just to cap off plan A, what are the fastest growing energy sources in the world? You've heard me say this before. It's oil, coal, and natural gas. Okay. That's not the right direction. So, yeah, and I know wind is just screaming up here, just wildly screaming up, although wind is about a third of this. Most of this is biomass. But yeah, so it's getting up there, and nuclear is flattening out because people are stupidly closing perfectly good nuclear power plants, like I just wrote about the other day in Sweden. And hydro's always been good, but nothing like fossil fuel. We keep building fossil fuel plants, and that is a bad thing. And there is, I mean, again, I just want to, it's kind of a bummer, sorry, but we are not going to meet this plan. There is absolutely no way humanity is going to cut emissions enough in the next 20 years to make any difference at all in global warming. I said it. Oh, I said it. Okay. It's a bummer. So what do we do then? Well, first of all, Washington State's great. I mean, Washington State has the lowest emissions by far, and our electricity is also the cheapest because it is the best mix. Okay, there's not a lot of fossil fuel in it. And it's also regulated. Floyd, it's regulated. That's why it's so great. Okay, just think of that Texas couple of weeks here. Not good, not regulated, bad.
Jim,
Yes.
I think you're saying that Kerry is the answer.
No, regulations are the answer, meaning you can't be stupid. Okay, you can't only care about money. I mean, I know this is America, you got to make a buck, I get it, but you can't only think of money. And that's what an unregulated energy market does. You only think of money. You don't think about reliability. You don't think about the people. You only think about money. And I get that, but it's not a driving force for good. It's simply money. Hey, we're a capitalist society. I get that. That's why you need regulation to rein in the worst of that. And again, we've seen that over and over again. And so I don't want to dwell on Texas, but we've been telling them for a decade that they have to winterize their systems, and they refuse because it costs too much, and there's no regulatory driver for it because they are an ERCOT, is within the boundaries of Texas completely. So there's no cross-border activity that can be regulated by the interstate commerce. All right, all the other energy systems, grids in the United States cross borders, and so they're regulated by the Interstate Commerce Commission, and thereby regulations like EPA and NRC and everyone else. But ERCOT doesn't have to do that, and that's why they didn't, because they don't have to. So who's going to do it? So anyway. So what happens then? Okay, all said and done, what happens if we don't achieve a low carbon mix in time to make any difference? Well, we're going to have to start messing with the atmosphere ourselves. We're going to have to just do this. Okay, that's what we do. Humans do this. It's not like we haven't messed with the atmosphere anyway. I mean, we've been messing with the atmosphere for the last 100 years, but now we have to mess with it more directly. So it's called geoengineering. Some people call it solar geoengineering. So the concepts are, okay, carbon capture, removal, and sequestration. You've all heard of that. It's not going very well, very difficult, but we got to do some of that. Reforestation. Yeah, actually, forests are the best sink for carbon on Earth. Okay, the best sink for it, along with carbonate rocks. Cloud brightening. Okay, now this is weird. Now here you have to say, well, we got to start reflecting sunlight back into space in a controlled manner. And you might say, oh my God, that's terrible. Oh. Yeah, well, so is global warming, okay? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Sorry. So you can cloud brighten through cloud seeding. We know how to do that. You can use high altitude aircraft to inject particles into the stratosphere, which is the best thing to do. You can, because the particles spread around the globe in a few weeks to a month, they have a lifetime of about 4 years when they drop out mainly into the ocean, and you have to replenish them. So you have to keep doing this. This is not a solution, okay? All this does is give us time, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years, to actually decarbonize. It's not a replacement for it. And it turns out UW is a leader in this area, along with Harvard. Those are the two main schools that are looking at this. Unfortunately, they can't get enough funding to do it correctly because everyone freaks out. Okay, this is schematically what that is about. So One, you put reflective aerosols into the stratosphere, okay, to reflect sunlight, just enough sunlight, not everything. We don't want to kill everything on Earth, but you want to reflect a lot of light. Same thing with cloud seeding. That's a lower altitude. Clouds are not in the stratosphere. Clouds are in the troposphere. Space mirrors. This is stupid, but I put it in there anyway. So, space mirrors to reflect sunlight, blah, blah, blah. Forestation. So reforestation. That's a good one. We can do that. We have always done that. We just need to do it at a bigger scale than anyone's thought about. Carbon capture from air plus storage. Okay, so you capture the CO2 out of the air. Very difficult and expensive because the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is hundreds of parts per million. Not much in there. Very hard to get something out that's not in a high enough concentration. And then, CO2 capture from fossil fuels. So you don't even let it get into the atmosphere. As soon as it comes out of the gas plant or the coal plant, you capture that and store it or use it for something. Iron fertilization, bad idea. Bad idea. Carbon dioxide removal. So that's pretty much what all of these are. So these are geoengineering methods. So let's just kind of go through it. Yeah.
Is the first number one up there the reflective particles? Does that suggest that every commercial airline flight release particles on every trip?
Not really. This is actually someone else's slide, but no, this means that you use high altitude aircraft, but not that kind of aircraft, to deposit the aerosols in the stratosphere. So you wouldn't be using an ordinary commercial jet. Okay, you would be using a high altitude jet, probably unmanned. Okay, so sorry, but again, you're going to inject reflective aerosols into the atmosphere. All right, so let's look at reforestation. This is how we do it normally. It's okay, very labor intensive, takes a long time. Okay, these guys are not going to be sucking out much CO2 from the atmosphere for decades. Okay, so this is a long-term thing. The problem is most of these solutions are long-term, except the injection of aerosols. So that's one of the problems. We're behind the eight ball already. We need to move fast. So this is the way we do it normally. Now it turns out there's new ways of doing this. Oops. There's using drones. These are special drones for reforestation. That's very cool. It's a cool company. Actually, look up Conca, Forbes, and drones, and this will come up. So this little guy can put down tens of thousands of seed pods a day, as opposed to humans planting trees. Doesn't take, you can't do more than a couple hundred. So these are seed pods, but they're not just seeds. They're actually special pods that contain seeds and nutrients and water. So when you drop them, they have a much higher chance of germinating. It's really quite cool. So they've been doing this over clear-cut areas for a while. It's a little company that's in the Pacific Northwest. I can't remember the name now. But this is the way to do it. All right, not people physically planting trees. That's too slow and too expensive. This is very cheap. Then there's take out carbon out of the atmosphere, a company called Geoengineering. They actually have this set up. They can do it. Okay, it's just very expensive. And you need about 70,000 of these racks to take out sufficient amount of CO2 because it's in such a low concentration in the atmosphere, really hard to get out. Okay.
Does that actually exist now? That set?
This is an artist's conception, but they have it on a small scale. They have like 6 of these. But this is what you have to do. You need ones that have hundreds of them, and you need tens of thousands of them all over the world, basically, to just be sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's the problem. The volume is so huge, the volume of the atmosphere, the concentration is so low, and the amount of CO2 you have to remove is, gigatons. So, how do you do that when you're just sucking 100 part per million out of the atmosphere? That it's really, really difficult, but doable. Okay, now the problem is, what do you do when you get the CO2 out of the atmosphere? What do you do with it? Okay, well, everyone thinks about sequestering it in the ground. Okay, that's fine. We generally use this for enhanced oil recovery and gas recovery in wells. We after we've taken out the easy stuff out of the gas and oil out of the rock formations, you can pump CO2 down, and that will mobilize more of it and get more of it out. So it's actually a secondary recovery. That's kind of ironic because you're recovering oil and gas. Okay, so you're using the CO2 you've trapped to recover more oil and gas. So that is kind of not solves much. It just doesn't make it worse. So it keeps the CO2 that you've released. It keeps the CO2 supply of that recovered oil neutral. You know what I mean? So you're using CO2 to recover fossil fuel, then you're burning it, making more CO2, then use that to so you're not really gaining much, but you're basically carbon neutral. Okay, that's okay. We use it for chemicals and refrigerants and things like that. We use it for carbonated beverages, but we're going to have to be drinking a hell of a lot of Coke to make this worthwhile. But here's the big thing: we can make fuel out of it. We can make food too, but we can make fuel out of it. That's the big thing. So here's the injection well, and there's a kitty. Hi, baby. So you can inject the CO2, and it basically pushes the oil and gas into a down gradient well, and then you put that to market and recycle the CO2. Look at those paws. Look at those paws.
Is that Jupiter?
No, that's Rupert. Rupert. He's a polydactyl. He has seven claws. Anyway, the other thing that you can do with it is you can store it underground. You've probably heard of this mostly, right? As what we do when we sequester CO2 out of the air or out of exhaust pipes, you're going to put it in the ground. Now that sounds okay, except that whenever we do that, we cause earthquakes. It's not so cool. And we don't have great places to put it because you have to put it in a formation that's slightly porous, so you can get a lot in there, but then it has to be capped with something that won't let it migrate through it. So just like oil and gas reservoirs, where you have a cap rock that holds them down, you need to find places that have that geometry where you have a porous rock overlain by a cap rock that will hold it down. And usually that cap rock is salt or clay. And so, you can do that, but then, you're pumping in an awful huge volume of gas. Okay. And although when you pump it underground, the pressure reduces the volume of the gas, it doesn't go away. I mean, you have a large volume. And so you have a problem. If you put in too much, you start buckling the formations. I mean, this is under high pressure. So that, we can do some of that. We have not been successful. But just up here in the Pacific Northwest, P&L, Pete McGrail, my old colleague at Patel, you can inject CO2 in the subsurface basalts here, and they will actually precipitate minerals, all right? Carbonates, calcium carbonates. And the thing is that when you go from a gas to a mineral, you've got millions of times less volume. All right. And a lot of the basalts here are porous basalts, vesicular basalts. And so you can load those up really great. So this is really nice. Okay. It just turns out that the pore water chemistry and the basalt chemistry of these rocks is ideal for this, absolutely ideal for this. But you'd have to get DOE to sign off on it, of course, because you'd want to do this at the Hanford site. What a great idea. What a great way to utilize the Hanford site to solve global warming. But you'd have to have thousands of injection wells, and that's not going to go over too well with the general public. And then DOE does not even want to talk about it. They do not want to talk about this at all, although it would be good. So Pete actually did a field study and injected this and then cored into it. And these carbonate nodules precipitated all throughout this vesicular basalt. It worked perfectly. Absolutely brilliant. So that is an option, but we'd have to actually do it. And then, of course, everyone's going to scream, oh, we need to study it for 30 years to see what's going to happen. It's like, no, you don't. This happens naturally. So, in fact, as a geologist, you want to go with natural processes, okay? Because we know how those work. We've been studying them for a long time, okay? When you come up with a new technology that doesn't have a counterpart in nature, then you get kind of worried that you don't understand what's going to happen over the long term. But this happens all the time in nature. These nodules precipitate all the time. So we know how that works. Now, the other thing you can do is you can make diesel fuels, use something called the Fischer-Tropsch process, in which you can take the CO2 right out of the air and make diesel fuel out of it. Diesel ready, just put it in your tank. Don't have to do anything else. It's really great. Now, it's about twice as expensive as ordinary diesel at this point, and it takes a lot of energy to do this. Okay, where's the energy going to come from? Nuclear. Oh, wow. Of course. That's what you would want to do. You could get an SMR going and you could put out millions of gallons of this stuff a year. Okay? Really good stuff. However, you've got to take a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere for this. So you'll couple this, let me go back up here, with this. Okay, so you take the CO2 out of the atmosphere using this system, and then you turn it into diesel fuel with this system. Now, back to what is actually most likely to work, and that we could do right now, but sounds weird. Okay, solar geoengineering. So what you're doing is you are injecting particles, and they can either be solid particles or liquid particles somewhere in the atmosphere, either up top in the stratosphere or down below in the troposphere and cloud brightening. Now, we know this works. Now, this figure is a little misleading. I would not use sulfate aerosols. Absolutely not. Okay, because that's some problems we get out of volcanoes. And let me come down here a little bit. Never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we put some kind of aerosols. I like mother of pearl. Okay, crushed up clamshells. Great stuff. Very benign. No problems. No sulfate issues. No acid ocean acidification issues. In fact, if you use mother of pearl, it'll actually address the ocean acidification issue because those fall back into the ocean. All right, and they'll be very small particles, so they would dissolve easily in water. Okay, so now again, the idea that you would have some floating technology that would take seawater and aerosolize it and put it into clouds. Okay, so you're brightening the clouds. Very large amount of small drops reflects light better. It's called albedo, the reflectivity of something. Use a fleet of robotic ships, and you can add salt to it. That's fine. And that's it. So these little things, these little robotic ships just run around. Oh, there's a baby right there. Hi, Gina. So you run these around the ocean continuously, brightening clouds. Okay? Sounds okay. You'd have to put out trillions and trillions of particles at this level. Now, we do this anyway. Okay? We do this to make snow. Okay, you use the same nozzles, use the same technology. When we're making snow, we generally don't make small particles like we would use for this, but it's the same technology and it's very easy. We know how to do it. But the best thing is this, the high altitude jet injection into the stratosphere, 14 to 25 kilometers, 10 to 15 miles. And in the stratosphere, they spread around the globe very fast, and they come out after about 4 years, 2 to 4 years. And again, this just gives us time to decarbonize. It is not a replacement for decarbonization because you have to keep this up every year, okay? Unless you want to do it for the next 1,000 years, which is dumb. So you're just giving yourself 50, 80 years to decarbonize because we're not going to do it the next 20. We're just not set up for it at all. And the estimated costs of this are thousands of times lower than a Green New Deal. I mean, the idea that you're going to decarbonize is going to cost, trillions of dollars. We're talking about $10 trillion to decarbonize just the United States. about 60 trillion to decarbonize the world. This is going to cost you a few billion a year. I mean, it's really amazing how cheap this is, because it's just particulates. So now we know this works because it happens all the time in nature. All right. So this is Mount Pinatubo, 1991. Krakatoa, you know, in the 1800s, you've heard about these huge volcanoes. They have to be very large. And when they are very large and they get particulates, which unfortunately are soot and sulfur, which are not nice, okay, not like mother of pearl. When you get them, a big enough volcano gets them 14 kilometers into the troposphere, and we see it. Our satellites were actually looking at this in 1991. You get a layer of soot, aerosols, into the atmosphere after Pinatubo, and they stayed up there for about 2 to 3 years, and they dropped the global temperature 2 degrees. That's the whole point. We know this works. It works all the time. All right? Every time you have a huge volcanic eruption throughout history, we can look at other indications of temperature like tree rings and that kind of thing. And it always drops the temperature 2 to 3 degrees. That's what we want. That's what we're looking for, right? So you have to do this. Unfortunately, you have to keep doing it, okay? Because this stuff comes out after 2 to 3 years. So you have to, every year, you're going to have to put up however many trillion particles into the into the stratosphere, and that's okay. Again, it's not really that difficult, and it doesn't cost that much. Of course, you have to figure out where to do it, how to, you need some research, and we're not doing that research, even though the research itself would be very cheap, hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't get any money for that because it's such a weird idea, even though we geologists know this very well. So again, there are experiments you can do. We have a Strata Cruiser balloon, okay, that can go up into the stratosphere, seed, and then come back and look at what it's done and see the effects. 10 years and $1 billion, $1 billion, not many billions, $1 billion over 10 years is all that's needed. How to figure this out, how to do it correctly, where to do it, when to do it, because there are some areas that you want to do it initially, and then it spreads out other areas you don't want to do it. Okay, you want it to spread into that area. So there's different, you need to figure out the atmospherics of this. And again, we know how to do that. We just haven't done it. And again, it'll take tens of trillions of dollars to get humanity off of fossil fuels. So this is a bargain. Again, it's a bizarre thing, but it is a bargain. So here's the Strata Cruiser. So again, we can do these experiments. We just need to do it. And take about 10 years to figure out how to do this well, how to do it right. The nice thing, if you don't like what's going on, you just stop. Okay? You just stop doing it because the stuff all falls out into the ocean. So, okay, give it a try. I mean, we're not doing anything now that's working. So this is really something we should look at. Take about 10 years, $1 billion, big deal. That's not even one wind farm up here on the Horseheaven Hills. And we have, this is a cloud chamber that Harvard's the other institution besides UW that's leading in this. And again, they've done a lot of experiments. We know how to do this. It's not that big of a deal. It's just weird. So, hey, suppose this shows that solar geoengineering works. What then? Who's going to decide where to set the thermostat? Okay. Who's going to make the decisions? The UN? America? Actually, China has said they're going to go ahead and do this anyway, regardless of what anyone thinks. When it becomes obvious that nothing else is working, China says, they're going to do it. What are you going to do? Bomb them? Okay. They're going to do it. And then, if this technology works, it would be unethical not to use it, especially on poor populations, because they're the ones that face the biggest risks from climate change. So if you say, well, okay, you really shouldn't impose your will on poorer countries. Yeah, well, they're the ones that need it. We'll be fine. I mean, we're rich, right? Yeah, maybe not so much later. But so again, if this works, it doesn't. I mean, if it works, you have a whole nother set of issues, a whole nother set of decisions to make, and who gets to make those. And as throughout human history, it's always been this: the rich and stronger ones make the decisions, and then everyone else has to live with it. Now, this is one that might actually be good. Thank you. All right, questions?
This is Howard. I have a comment and then a question. You intrigued me with Mount Pinatubo because I was in the Air Force at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and
excellent.
I saw that every day, but that was in the 70s before it blew up. But when it did blow up, it took out the air base and all that.
Yes, and that has been an interesting political problem with China because they came in and took it over, and we didn't, which has caused the South China Sea issues.
Exactly. My question is on cloud seeding. I'm stuck in the 70s, but back in the 70s in Rapid City, South Dakota, they cloud seeded and they had a tremendous torrential flood that went down a canyon, and it just killed a lot of people. And I saw the aftermath of that where the cars were just in little sections. So can we prevent that with this cloud seeding possibility?
Well, that's why I don't like cloud seeding per se. I mean, that's one of the strategies, but I don't particularly like that. One, for that reason alone. Second, getting up into the stratosphere, doesn't cause that kind of issue. Okay, I mean, you'd have long-term changes, but you wouldn't cause torrential rains or that kind of thing. That's why you need the $1 billion for 10 years. You need to play with this. You need to do it so that you figure out the issues, and before you go gung ho on it. So so to me, that would be one of the issues to figure out if you're going to go with cloud seeding. If not, then there are other issues such as where do you inject this into the stratosphere over continents or over the ocean? Okay, there are two different things there.
Right.
Again, it spreads pretty quickly. I mean, it spreads on the order of days to weeks. So the whole globe is covered, but you can decide where, or we need to decide where to have the highest concentration of these first before it spreads. Okay, and that would probably be over the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean, that kind of thing. That's where I would do it. But again, these are things you need to work out, but they are doable.
Thank you.
Are they working on this at the University of Washington?
Yes.
And who is it there that is